Welcome into another Untitled interview edition of the Untitled Film Project Podcast. Today, we are joined by writer and director of the new movie, The Thing with Feathers, hitting theaters here in the States November 28th. Dylan Southern. Dylan, thank you so much for doing this, man. Really appreciate you spending time with us today.
No worries.
The Thing with Feathers is based on the book Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. As the writer of this screenplay, what lengths do you go to make sure you honor the original source material?
On this adaptation, it was so important to me because this is my first narrative feature. I've made documentaries before, and Max Porter, who wrote the original novel, trusted me with this book, which is beloved by so many. It's been translated into like 35 different languages. It's been adapted into stage plays. It's a beloved book by me especially. So I felt a huge weight of responsibility taking Max's book and turning it into a film. And I wanted to honor the things that I really loved about the book whilst also making it its own thing. Luckily, I had Max on hand throughout the process. You know, he was a godfather to the project, and I could pick up the phone and ask him questions. But, you know, books and films are very different things, and Max can do things with language that we couldn't do in the film. But for me, it was about honoring the DNA and what was so special about his book. And, I took great lengths to do that.
Most movie fans know Benedict Cumberbatch as a Marvel superhero, of course, but he's an incredible dramatic actor as well, as you can see in this, of course. Mm-hmm. What was it like having him as this film's lead?
I mean, it was wild. It was not something I was ever expecting because, in my head, I was making a very small independent film, low budget indie film, and I never expected to get an actor who's worked with some of the great directors, who's been on the biggest Marvel sets, who's played, who's done Shakespeare on stage. So I was quite daunted. I was like, oh God, how am I going to direct this guy on my first ever film who's had this, but he made it easy for me. You know, we became friends very fast. We had a lot of meetings before even, getting on set, and talked about the film, talked about the script, talked about everything, that wasn't related to the film. We just became quite firm friends. And by the time we got onto set, we had this shorthand and we were sort of real collaborators. And he taught me a lot, and he made it very easy for me, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. But yeah, I was never expecting in my first film to get Benedict Cumberbatch. It was pretty wild.
You mentioned your other projects earlier, like, they're kind of centered around live artists. Obviously, mm-hmm. The band's Blur, LCD Sound System. You directed Aziz Ansari's Buried Alive special, of course. So What are the unique challenges between directing a music film or a stand-up special or, whatever it may be, with a live artist is what I mean, versus a dramatic piece like this?
I mean, they're completely different in so many ways. And then in other ways, they're similar. The documentary work I did, there are stories there, but and you set out with an idea of what story you want to tell, but you have to be prepared for the story to go in different ways or whereas this was a dramatic feature adapted from someone else's novel, and it was much more about me being committed to the way that I wanted to tell the story. So I had to bring a different set of skills. I'd always dreamt of being a narrative film director rather than a documentary film director. It's just the way that I found the route into the industry was through music videos and then music films. But, for the last 10 years, I've been working on this and a couple of other scripted projects. So it didn't feel like a big jump from one thing to the other. It just felt like I was working on these things side by side, but the documentaries were what the world got to see first. But, I think I learned a lot doing this as my first narrative feature because, it's got everything. They say don't work with children and animals, and I had both in my first film, as well as like an animatronic head and stilts and a costume, and it was certainly a baptism of fire, but I wouldn't change it. It was a sort of a fantastic experience.
What made you want to make films to begin with? I mean, looking back on it, what movie did you see? Who placed a camera in your hand? Whatever that tipping point was to start this trajectory to get us here.
I mean, it started when I was 5 years old and I saw E.T., and then it continued throughout my childhood. I just loved going to the cinema. I was in a cinema club. My parents would drop me off and I would go in and watch movies on my own. Then when I was a teenager, I had a paper route and I saved up for a video camera. And me and my friends would make bizarrely Vietnam War movies in East Yorkshire, England, and it just spiraled from there. Like I was just obsessed. Like I would watch anything I could. We used to have a show in the UK called Movie Drome, which was on one of our terrestrial TV channels, and it was presented by Alex Cox, the film director, and it would give me my first look at films like Terminator or Videodrome, and it was. There was always I was always just obsessed with films and seeing them as much as possible and just like in love with the idea of making them, really.
Do you have a go-to film that you watch just on in the background always, or you turn on the TV, it's on, you stop and watch it, and then do you have a favorite film of all time?
I have a lot of favorite films of all time. I have go-to films as well. I mean, my favorite film of all time is The Last Detail.
Strong choice.
Yeah, I love that film, and I love Blue Collar, the Paul Schrader film. I'm a really big fan of early 70s films, but then if I'm walking past the Prince Charles Cinema in London and they're showing RoboCop, I'm straight in there. And it's a broad church. I have so many favorite films, and I do tend to watch old movies almost exclusively. The Prince Charles in London is my favorite cinema, and there was a point where I was going in there about 4 or 5 times a week, and I've had to kind of cut that back a bit this year, having made a film. But so too many films to mention that I love watching. Bizarrely, I think the film I've seen most at that cinema is Master and Commander, which is just like
okay.
It's just anytime it's on, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in the mood for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, so finally, I assume you were in the house for the world premiere at Sundance for you. What was that like to show this, again, your first dramatic movie to an audience for the first time? What was that like?
It was amazing. And it was amazing because that's the festival that gave me my first screening of my documentaries. So I'd been there, with 2 other films before. So to sort of bring this new thing that I'd done to a place that I have so much esteem for. But more than that, it was, to see it with an audience, because you're not sure when you sit in the edit and you've watched it 100 times whether it's really going to hit the way that you think it's going to. And every time I've watched it with an audience, I've heard sobs in the right places, I've heard laughter in the right places, and talking to people afterwards, it seems to have really moved, a lot of people. And that's kind of one of the reasons for making the film, was for it to be, it's not a plot-driven film, it's an emotionally driven film. And, the hope is that it's cathartic to people who've been through a bereavement, or that it's illuminating to people who haven't. So seeing it with an audience is the sort of proof that you haven't been laboring under any misapprehensions for the last 6 months while you've been in the edit, and seeing that it works in the places you hoped it would is really, really kind of rewarding and encouraging.
But that is validating for sure. Dylan Southern, writer and director of the new drama, The Thing with Feathers, has been our guest here on the Untitled Film Project Podcast. Go see it in the theater, you guys. November 28th. It's a powerhouse. Dylan, thank you so much for doing this. I'm wishing you nothing but the best, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. A real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Untitled Film Project Podcast. To support the show, please rate, review, follow, and subscribe. Original music by Jeremy Schwartz. Special thanks to the Music City Film Critics Association. Editing and post-production by Jeremy K. Gover. Voiceover by Chad Bennett.